الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وخليله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة وجاهد في سبيل الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين أما بعد. All praise and thanks are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He is worthy of being thanked and praised for the infinite blessings He's bestowed upon us. Those blessings that you and I recognize from health, from prosperity, from safety, from family, from shelter, from food, from the many diseases that we don't have, and from those blessings that you and I don't realize, or the ones that we take for granted, the continuous beating of our heart, the involuntary continuous breaths that we take, that we are able to walk, things we don't think about that are unconscious to us. And if that is a difficult thing for anyone, may Allah alleviate and give someone patience if they're going through that. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides to the straight path, there is none that can misguide such a soul. And you and I should always be in a constant state of remembrance and supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are not deviated from that path and that we remain upon that path. And whomsoever chooses for themselves a path of misguidance, there is none that can guide such a soul. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect myself and you from the evils of ourselves and the evil of shaitan in the form of ins and jinn, from deviating from his path and from being amongst those who are misguided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu ittaqullaha haqqa tuqatih. Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu ittaqullaha haqqa tuqatih. Wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. O you who have attained faith, have consciousness and reverence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a manner which is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and die not but in a state of loving surrender, of loving submission. For you and I cannot choose when we leave this world. We cannot choose if our soul departs later today, or a week from now, or months from now, or years from now. But we can choose the actions we make so that whenever that moment comes, inshallah, it is with the blessing of salam, of peace and blessings from the angels, and the gateway from a life that is filled with its struggles to a life of eternal bliss. And forgive me for going off topic, just to remind people that your salah till Jummah is potentially invalid if you are on your telephone. Put your phone away for the validity of your own prayer. Put it in airplane mode. I know some like to think that it's only the 2 rak'ahs you're praying. No, of the wisdoms is that Salat al-Dhuhr, which is 4 rak'ahs, is replaced with 2 rak'ahs of Salat al-Jummah with a khutbah. And that khutbah replaces 2 of those rak'ahs. And if you prefer to be on your phone right now during that time, you are taking away from your salah. In these blessed moments, again, I want to reflect on something that has to do with the beautiful character of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. How do I communicate to myself and you how amazing the Prophet was alayhi salatu wasalam? He's not someone that any of us has seen, unless we've seen him, of course, in our dreams. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be that close to him that we would love and long to see him, and that we will see him over and over again, and motivated eternally from that sight and taste of being in the presence of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. But how is it for the average person like myself and you that we can find this beautiful deep connection with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? How is it we can do that? And in thinking of that, one of the simplest things, and obviously there are more biographies written about him than any other. There are more videos about him than any other person in history. And we study that, and we are moved by that, and we're moved to tears by that. And nobody says his name more. Nobody is named after, no one has a name more than Muhammad. And regardless of where we are in our religious journeys, when we have children, deep down inside, we want them to be like him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And regardless of anyone's faith, deep down inside, when somebody has a child that enters this world, they want his beautiful character. Whether or not they know him, alayhi salatu wasalam, they want their child to have beautiful character. They want their child to be trustworthy. They want their child to be honest. They want their child to be someone who grows up to have influence in matters which are good and makes the world a better place. Has anyone in history done this more remarkably than the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam? And my appeal to you today is to make the case to look into your lives. Anyone that you admire and love beyond a superficial level, and even if it is the superficial level of physical appearance of beauty, but beyond the superficial level of how they appear, anyone you admire for their character, for the way they handle situations, for the way they speak, anyone you admire, whether you realize it or not, you admire them and you respect them because you are respecting a quality that Allah gave the Prophet ﷺ, and you are seeing it in its diluted form, and it still looks beautiful. I'll give a few examples. Perhaps you work with somebody, and we all know somebody, and some of us are this person, who went from rags to riches, who perhaps came to this country with nothing more than $20 in their pocket. And seemingly, of course, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His tawfiq, pushed through tremendous things, went through hunger, not knowing if they would put food on the table, and jumped from job to job, and secured, despite the difficulties and the difficult hours this person had to work, secured a better living for their children. And you admire that work ethic, and you and I just don't have it. That is something that is in the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. Perhaps you have that colleague who can literally be thrown into a firestorm at work. A room with managers who have loftier resumes than you, who are more powerful than you in your company. Or you have to present to teachers at school who are clearly more knowledgeable on a subject than you. And perhaps when you present to these people, they may say things that make you feel unintelligent. They might make you feel foolish. They might ask a question or two that make you lose your confidence or tremble in your shoes or be nervous or stutter over things that you know. And then you have this colleague or you have this classmate or you have this family member that you can go to, and if they are in the same room as you when you're speaking, you feel more confident when you're speaking. Or if that manager or that person at work is so intense that you are unable to present coherently, that other person would be willing to present and would be willing to take the criticism and would be willing to take the hit for you. And when things got toughest, they were there. That is a quality in the Rasul alayhi salatu wassalam. Or perhaps in your family, I can't speak to my child. I can't speak to my wife or husband. I can't speak to my father or mother. I can't speak with this friend. I can't speak with this person at work. Every single time it's a conflict. Every single time it's a fight. Every single time somebody's crying or somebody feels miserable or somebody falls into despair. And you just feel like work is a place I just don't want to be. Or this house is a place that I don't want to be. And you feel like things are on the brink of disaster, or they are already in that disastrous state. And how on earth can it be rescued? And yet there's this person in your life that you can talk to them. And maybe they don't even need to say anything to you. But you can talk to them, and just because you are talking to them and they hear you, you somehow feel better. Because this person has been blessed with some sense of nur, has been blessed with some light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that just being around them makes that difficult situation you're in a little better. That is a quality in the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And that is something that the Quraysh and the Kuffar like to say in detracting from the Prophet ﷺ. What's wrong with this Prophet? Huwa udhun. He hears what anyone has to say. No. The fact that he can listen to people is one of his best qualities. No one has on the earth better words to say than the Prophet ﷺ, because what he's saying is wahi. It is a form of revelation. Whether it's the Quran or his hadith, it is inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yet, despite that, he has plenty of time to listen to others. And you may know people in your life who listen. And of course, they won't do it as good as the Prophet ﷺ, but because they've been given a special gift, they can heal you in a particular way. And maybe you need them to do a little bit more than listen. And you need that feedback, or you need that coaching with this person. How do I rescue my relationship from disaster? How do I salvage a good relationship with my child, with my parent? It's nothing but a power struggle. How do I get through a day at work dealing with this incredibly difficult personality? How do I get through school when I feel like I'm being bullied against, or I feel like I'm being attacked in this way or that way, whether it's physically or psychologically? How do I get through that? And then this person can give you words, can give you strategies that can bring your relationship back from ruins, that can breathe and provide you new openings into your relationship with your children, with your spouse, at the workplace, at school. Because what they're giving you is a toolkit for reverence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is taqwa. And whether or not you have read the verse or not, it is true. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَل لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Whoever has reverence, whoever has awe, whoever has Allah in their hearts, Allah will create a way out from them and provide for them in ways that they had no idea were possible. You think your relationship is going off a cliff? You think you may get fired? You think that this coworker is completely out there to get you? And Allah provides a way out. You think your relationship with your child is so terrible, and you just have no idea if your child is going to make the right choices in life, and you choose the path of God consciousness, one way or another, Allah will create a way out. And this person that you may know in your life embodies a prophetic quality, a quality that the Prophet ﷺ has, that shows you a way out. And in knowing these people in your life, you realize that they are not people who don't have issues. They are not people who don't have their own struggles. They are not people who don't have their own issues in their house with their spouses. They are not people who don't have their own issues with finances. They might have issues with finances. They might have issues in their household. They might have issues in the workplace. They might have issues of people not accepting them for who they are. But what they have that you love and you want is the strength to get through all of those things. And what they show you is this life is not meant to be heaven. This life is not meant to be Jannah. Jannah is what's going to come. But they provide you a toolkit so that if you are faced with grief, if you are faced with sadness, if you are faced with poverty, if you are faced with loss and hunger, they give you the toolkit of patience. They give you the toolkit of وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةً قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. You learn from them either directly from their tongues and more importantly through their actions that the pathway to success in navigating these trials is through patience and perseverance, and knowing that anything that befalls me is because Allah decreed it to befall me, and that I can get through this not on my own accord but through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help. What was the most difficult day in your life, O Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? Asked Aisha. She did not live the Meccan seerah to know what Ta'if was, and so she thought it was certain that it was the Battle of Uhud. Because in her life, in her adult life, that was the most difficult thing. What was the most difficult day in your life, O Prophet, Messenger of Allah? Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And she was expecting one answer, and he gives the answer of, it was that day I went to Uhud. It was that day I went to Ta'if. He had already lost his uncle who provided him protection, Abu Talib. And so the vitriol of the Quraysh had gone from mere of being verbal, which is destructive in its own. And I mean, imagine this. Some of you are sitting here with your uncle. Some of you, if you look across the hallway, if you look across the prayer hall, your aunt or uncle is in here. And they love you. Imagine that aunt or uncle calling you a fool, calling you a madman, saying you are crazy. That person who raised you and carried you when you were a kid because you yourself didn't have a father, they're calling you crazy. They're calling you a fool. That's what the Prophet ﷺ had in his home. Imagine yourself going home and coming to your parent, or coming to may nobody ever have to experience this. Coming to someone you care about with a verse from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A path to Jannah. Here, you know what? We're doing this wrong. We're not worshiping Allah correctly. Let's follow this blueprint of how we can live a life that God will love and that we can be forgiven for the things we've done incorrectly. And then that person that you approach says, "You're crazy. You're an absolute fool." That's what the Prophet dealt with. And that's what I'm trying to impress upon us. And when Abu Talib passed away, it wasn't just being told you're a fool, it began to be physical. They began to bruise him and bloody him up, just like they would to the slave class and the lowest people in society. And so when he went to Ta'if, he was chased out of town. Not just chased out of town, but their leaders said, "There's no way this is a true message. Because if it was a true message, God wouldn't have sent it to you. He would have sent it to one of us. He would have sent it to one of us leaders, people of high status." And so what they did was look at all the little kids in the masjid. All the little kids in the masjid, they got all those little kids in Ta'if and had them chased out of town. They said, "All of you little kids, grab rocks and stones and throw them at the greatest human being who walked the earth." And so that brings him to the most difficult moments of his life. And when he's several kilometers of the city, the narration shows he said, "I didn't even realize where I was until I reached Qarn al-Tha'alab, Qarn al-Manazil, until I was several kilometers out of Ta'if." And then in that you see his toolkit, and you see that the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't not experience grief, he experienced grief. He saw his people being persecuted. He saw himself chased out of town. He saw himself chased out of another town with no town to go back to, because Mecca was not a friendly place for him. Till he's driven to a cliff, and where this would have broken perhaps you and I, we see strength in the greatest human being who ever lived, and perhaps strength in people that we know in our lives that can navigate situations that you and I cannot navigate. And you hear the words that, despite the isnad, you know can only be from a prophet of God, alayhi salatu wassalam, where he says, where he complains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he complains and he says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "Ya Allah, who are you leaving me to? Who are you entrusting me to? Are you angry with me? I'm complaining to you of my weakness, of my helplessness to men, of their strength over me. Ya Allah, are you angry with me? If you are not angry with me, then none of this matters." And he asks Allah for protection. And he knows that La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, which is the conclusion of that dua. There's no strength except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in these beautiful people of nur in your life, you are realizing that they're able to help you navigate your life because they embody something that the Prophet ﷺ had. And so you will experience grief, you will experience sadness, but in those moments you learn from these beautiful people of light who are merely, again, extensions of the Rasul ﷺ's light, how to get through those moments, how to get through those most difficult times, where somebody might run away from God, somebody might run away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam turns only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that shows the way out. That is the only way out. There might be other moments where you feel like you have strength and money and wealth, but that's only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's only a distraction. Even though you have those things, you are just as vulnerable as someone else. And we've seen that in the stories of others in the Quran. And it's not because these beautiful people in your lives don't sometimes have lapses in their life and growing from it and becoming a better person, and you see that person become a better person. And of course, the quote-unquote mistakes or missteps of the Prophet ﷺ are not like yours and mine. But they are preserved, perhaps some of them in the Mus'haf, such as the story that we all know in Abasa wa Tawalla, where the Prophet ﷺ turned away from Abdullah ibn Maktum. And this is preserved in the Mus'haf, where he was speaking to the elite of Quraysh, and the blind man came to him, wanting to ask a question. And the elect of the Quraysh were listening, but their hearts weren't really with the Prophet ﷺ. But this other man was coming, longing for the Prophet ﷺ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrects his misjudgment in this situation. And it's preserved in the Quran, and we read it. And while this may be humiliating for many, you see the richness of Iman in the Prophet ﷺ, and he shows us what we should do if we make a misjudgment. Whenever he would see him, he would say, he'd say, welcome to the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrected my misjudgment through. Allah pointed out a mistake I made through you. Welcome. That's how amazing he was. Reflect on his character. Reflect on his character. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم من كل ذنب فاستغفروه تجدوه غفورا رحيما. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Perhaps you admire people for their moral courage and moral intelligence and moral fortitude. When the definitions of what is right and wrong are changing. When the definitions of family are changing. When the definitions of who to love and how to love are changing. When the definitions of what is morally correct and morally wrong are changing. And you know this person in your life, he or she, that stands like a wall and mountain of Iman, like a tree of faith as described in the Quran. You are seeing something that can only be also in the Prophet ﷺ in a more perfect way. It was not advantageous in any way from a bird's eye view in Mecca to be a Muslim. What was the advantage to be the only person, metaphorically, to wear a shirt a different color than somebody else? To preach a faith against the elites. To preach a faith that wanted to bring the weakest of society equal to those who are the most elect in society, or better than them based off of the quality in their heart. That destabilized the way they went about their economics and daily lives. That would not consume the weak anymore, that would not consume the orphan anymore, that would not enslave people anymore. He had no support in this from the elites in society, and yet he could get through that. You and I know what is right many times, but we just don't have the moral fortitude to put our foot down. And you might know people in your life who can do that at a simpler level. And if you admire that, know you are admiring something that is in the Prophet ﷺ in a more perfect way. And so to conclude, I just want to say a few things. The Prophet did not sacrifice ﷺ so that you and I can be comfortable. He sacrificed so that you and I can be comfortable in the sense that we don't have to live in Mecca that was hostile to him, sure. But he didn't sacrifice so that you and I can sit here when other people are struggling in the world and not try to help them in their struggles. The freedoms we've been given, perhaps, that others have not been given, to stand up for those people who maybe cannot stand up for themselves. Reflect on that. Number 2, I hope that by showing you some of these prophetic characters, I'm impressing upon you a question I want all of us to ask in our lives. When you reach that next difficult moment in your life, or good moment, a moment of profound happiness, or a moment of sadness or grief or poverty or loss, I want myself and you to ask, what would the Prophet ﷺ do in this situation? What would he do in this situation? And lastly, I want myself and you to make it a point to love those who the Prophet loved, because that is one of the easiest ways, ﷺ, to begin to have his character. You know, people like to celebrate the champion of character that Rasul ﷺ was, but they don't realize, and they know intellectually, but they don't realize in practice who he was from beginning to end. You can tell me he was an orphan, but if you see an orphan in the society, if you see an orphan in the community, do you actually want to be around that orphan? The orphan is often the one who has behavioral issues. The orphan is sometimes one who has, who's not the most desirable to be around, just simply put. If you had seen the Prophet ﷺ, you have to know that when you read the seerah, you realize nobody wanted to be his wet nurse. Nobody wanted to breastfeed him, except Halima as-Sa'diyya, radiallahu anha. You want to celebrate the Prophet? Look at the people who walked his path. Look at the orphans. Look at the needy. And see what you can do with them. See what you can do to raise them. See what you can do to bring. And then you will be amazed that the greatest people in society will have navigated that difficult road, because they know what it's like to have nothing. They know what it's like to rely only on Allah. They know what it's like to be rejected from many people and have most people not even look at them. And that will heal my heart and your heart from many of the things that we have. And you will be surprised that many of the things in our lives will just go away. Many of our struggles will just go away as a result of alleviating the struggle of somebody else, which is Allah's promise. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamin innaka hamidun majid. Allahumma aghfir lil muslimina wal muslimat والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please perfect our character in a way that is closer to that of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. Allow us to embody the character of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Allow us to remember him as he should be remembered, and praise him as he should be praised, and to praise you as you should be praised, Ya Allah. Wa aqim as-salah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي